Iran does not need to physically destroy the United States Navy to win this conflict. They simply need to render the geography of the Persian Gulf mathematically impossible to navigate. We often hallucinate that modern victory requires the total annihilation of enemy forces, but the definitions of warfare have fundamentally shifted in the 21st century. In the modern era, true victory is defined solely by the strategic ability to deny the adversary access to critical economic and military space. The Pentagon categorizes this doctrine as anti-access area denial, or A2AD. But if you look at the raw physics, it is the weaponization of a geographic choke point. To truly understand the Iranian strategy, you must first look at the map and realize that the Strait of Hormuz is not a highway, but a 21-mile-wide cage. A Nimitz-class aircraft carrier relies entirely on speed and open ocean maneuverability to survive, but inside the narrow Gulf, that advantage is stripped away by the terrain. The Iranian defense doctrine is not built on matching American firepower ton for ton, because they understand that trying to build a conventional blue water navy is a suicide mission. Instead of constructing massive cruisers that serve as easy targets, they have invested decades into an asymmetric arsenal designed specifically to exploit the shallow waters of the littoral zone. This represents a fundamental shift from the physics of power to the physics of cost, where the goal is to force the adversary to spend billions defending against pennies. The first kinetic layer of this defensive onion is not a high-tech hypersonic missile, but a swarm of hundreds of small, agile, fast attack craft armed with rockets. Individually, a 30-foot Boghammer speedboat is nothing more than a nuisance to a destroyer. But when deployed in a coordinated pack of 50, the calculus changes entirely. The radar systems on a modern Aegis destroyer are designed to track high-altitude ballistic missiles and supersonic aircraft, not hundreds of small wooden fiberglass hulls bouncing on the waves. This creates a massive saturation problem for the fire control systems, effectively jamming the decision-making loop of the defending ship through the sheer volume of incoming vectors. If a destroyer possesses 2 defense cannons but is faced with 20 hostile speedboats approaching from different azimuths, the mathematics of interception guarantee that some attackers will get through. The swarm does not need to sink the ship to be effective. They only need to strip away its sensors, damage its propulsion, or force it to expend its magazine. While the surface boils with speedboats, the second layer of the trap waits silently below the waterline in the form of thousands of smart naval mines seeded throughout the channel. The Strait of Hormuz is shallow enough that bottom-tethered mines effectively turn the entire passage into a randomized minefield that requires days of slow, methodical sweeping to clear. Modern mines are not the floating spheres of World War II. They are sophisticated acoustic sensors buried in the silt that listen for the specific magnetic signature of a capital ship. A single smart mine costing $10,000 can effectively mission-kill a $2 billion warship by shattering its keel or destroying its complex propulsion shafts with a pressure wave. The strategic value of the mine is psychological, because the moment one ship is struck, the entire fleet must halt operations and assume a defensive posture until the lane is cleared. Clearing a minefield under fire from coastal artillery is one of the most dangerous and time-consuming operations in naval warfare, turning a sprint into a deadly crawl. This delay is exactly what the Iranian strategy requires, because time allows them to mobilize their third and most kinetic layer of defense, the mobile coastal missile batteries. The Iranian coast is lined with rugged mountains and caves that provide perfect natural cover for truck-mounted anti-ship cruise missiles like the Noor and the Qatar systems. These mobile launchers utilize shoot-and-scoot tactics, where they emerge from a tunnel, fire a salvo of sea-skimming missiles, and vanish back underground before counter-battery fire arrives. Detecting a missile launch is easy, but destroying the launcher itself is nearly impossible when it is hidden inside a granite mountain deep within enemy territory. The geography of the Gulf means that a ship in the center of the channel is never more than 20 miles from the coast, placing it well within the kill zone. A standard anti-ship missile flies at Mach 0.9 just above the waves, giving the ship's defensive systems less than 30 seconds to detect, track, and engage the threat. When you combine the surface swarm, the underwater minefield, and the coastal missile barrage, you create a multi-domain kill box that overwhelms the defensive capacity of any single task force. This is the concept of saturation applied to naval warfare, forcing the American fleet to burn through its defensive interceptors faster than they can be resupplied by logistics. Once the magazines of the Arleigh Burke destroyers are empty, the fleet becomes vulnerable to even the most primitive attacks, forcing a humiliating withdrawal to the open sea. But the visible threats are only half the equation, because the shallow depth of the Persian Gulf creates a unique acoustic environment that favors the silent predator. Enter the Ghadar-class midget submarine, a vessel designed specifically for the unique thermal layers and high background noise of the Gulf's warm, shallow waters. Unlike a massive nuclear submarine that struggles to maneuver in water less than 300 feet deep, The Gattier is small, diesel-electric, and nearly silent when running on battery. These mini-subs can sit motionless on the ocean floor, blending in with the acoustic clutter of the seabed, waiting for a high-value target to pass directly overhead. In this environment, active sonar becomes unreliable due to reverberation, turning the hunt for these submarines into a game of chance that the surface fleet cannot afford to play. A Gattier does not need to win a duel with a destroyer. It only needs to fire 2 heavy torpedoes at close range to break the back of a commercial tanker. The presence of these silent assassins creates a zone of uncertainty where no commander can be sure that the water beneath their hull is truly safe. This paranoia slows down operations, forces escorts to prioritize sub-hunting over air defense, and further dilutes the offensive power of the strike group. We are witnessing a systematic dismantling of the traditional advantages of a superpowered navy through the application of cheap, locally produced, and highly effective denial systems. The economics of this warfare are terrifyingly lopsided. A $1 million missile interceptor is used to shoot down a $50,000 cruise missile, bleeding the treasury dry with every engagement. Iran has stockpiled thousands of these relatively cheap weapons, creating a magazine depth that allows them to sustain high-intensity combat operations for weeks or even months. Meanwhile, the logistical tail required to resupply an American carrier group with advanced interceptors spans 7,000 miles of ocean and takes weeks to organize. This logistical friction is the hidden variable that determines the outcome of the conflict, as a ship without missiles is nothing more than a floating hotel. To compound the logistical nightmare, Iran has integrated a new variable into the equation: mass-produced, long-range suicide drones designed to hunt infrastructure. These loitering munitions fly low and slow, slipping under conventional radar nets to strike fuel depots, desalination plants, and command centers deep behind the lines. They do not carry massive warheads, but they possess the precision to hit specific valves, transformers, and radar dishes that keep the military machine running. By targeting the support infrastructure rather than the hardened combat units, they degrade the operational capability of the enemy without engaging them in direct battle. A $1 billion air defense system like the Patriot is ill-suited for shooting down a $2,000 drone made of lawnmower parts and plastic. This creates an economic attrition rate that is unsustainable, forcing the defenders to make impossible choices about what to protect and what to sacrifice. The drone waves serve as a constant drain on attention and resources, ensuring that there is no safe rear area for the invading force to rest and refit. The cumulative effect of these 6 tactics, swarms, mines, missiles, subs, drones, and logistic strikes is the creation of a zone where the cost of entry exceeds the value of the objective. While the fleet fights for survival at sea, the 6th and most critical tactic targets the very lungs of the American military machine, the forward air bases. For decades, the United States has operated from massive, fortified sanctuaries like Al-Udeid and Al-Dhafra, relying on the assumption that concrete walls equal safety. But in the age of precision ballistic missiles, a fixed runway is no longer a strategic asset. It is a pre-calculated set of GPS coordinates waiting to be erased. Iran possesses the largest arsenal of short and medium-range ballistic missiles in the Middle East, specifically engineered to bridge the gap across the Persian Gulf. These weapons do not need to destroy every hangar or barrack to succeed. They simply need to cut the runways with specialized cratering submunitions. If a runway is severed every 2,000 feet, a modern fighter jet fully loaded with fuel and ordnance physically cannot generate enough lift to take off. A grounded air force turns the most advanced fighter squadrons on Earth into expensive paperweights, unable to provide air cover for the fleet struggling in the strait. This is the physics of logistics denial. By removing the ability to generate sorties, you blind the fleet and strip away its protective umbrella. The threat extends beyond the tarmac to the fuel depots and ammunition bunkers that sustain high-intensity combat operations. Modern warfare consumes jet fuel and precision munitions at an industrial rate, requiring a continuous, unbroken chain of supply ships and storage tanks. A single, well-placed missile striking a bulk fuel farm creates a catastrophic fire that can burn for days, effectively starving the fighter wing of its energy source. Without the continuous flow of JP-8 fuel, the operational tempo of the American forces collapses from hundreds of sorties a day to absolute zero. The defense against this ballistic rain is the Patriot and THAAD missile systems, engineering marvels designed to hit a bullet with a bullet. However, these systems are governed by the ruthless mathematics of saturation and magazine depth, variables that favor the attacker in a prolonged exchange. A Patriot battery has a finite number of interceptors, and reloading the launchers takes precious time that a hyper-war scenario does not provide. If the enemy fires 50 cheap ballistic missiles at a base protected by 40 interceptors, 10 warheads are mathematically guaranteed to impact. The The economic asymmetry here is fatal. The attacker spends hundreds of thousands to force the defender to spend millions, eventually bankrupting the defensive shield. Once the interceptors are exhausted, the remaining infrastructure is left naked to subsequent waves of attack, leading to total operational paralysis. This strategy of targeting logistics essentially decouples the American frontline forces from their rear support, leaving them isolated in a hostile zone. It forces the U.S. Navy to push its supply ships further back, stretching the supply lines until they snap under the tension of distance and risk. We are looking at a battle space where the concept of a safe zone has been deleted from the map, and every square inch within 1,000 miles is contested. This creates a psychological pressure cooker for the command staff, who must manage a war where their own headquarters is as vulnerable as the frontline tanks. The objective of these strikes is not to invade territory or capture cities, but to induce a state of systemic shock in the adversary's logistical nervous system. By disrupting the flow of fuel, parts, and data, the Iranian strategy aims to freeze the American decision-making cycle entirely. A frozen enemy is a defeated enemy, regardless of how much firepower they technically possess in their silos. This brings us to the core philosophy of the Iranian way of war. They are not fighting to win a conventional victory. They are fighting to inflict unbearable cost. In a war of attrition, the winner is not the one with the best technology, but the one with the highest tolerance for pain and the lowest cost of operation. The United States military is built for quick, decisive knockouts. It is historically allergic to prolonged, grinding conflicts with high casualty rates. Iran understands this cultural center of gravity and has designed a war machine specifically to drag the conflict into the mud. Every day, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, the global economy hemorrhages billions of dollars in lost oil revenue, and shipping insurance spikes. The strategic clock is ticking against the West from the moment the first shot is fired, creating immense political pressure to end the conflict on unfavorable terms. This is the definition of victory in the 21st century. Not the planting of a flag, but the successful denial of the enemy's strategic objectives. The integration of swarms, mines, and missiles creates a layered defense that requires a methodical, slow, and bloody dismantling process. To clear the strait, the U.S. Navy would have to methodically destroy thousands of targets while under constant fire, a process that could take months. During those months, the price of oil would skyrocket, global markets would panic, and the political will to continue the fight would erode. This is the trap, a military problem with no quick military solution, only a long, expensive, and dangerous grind. It turns the Persian Gulf into a meat grinder designed to chew up capital ships and spit out political crises. The genius of this approach lies in its acknowledgement of reality. Iran knows it cannot rule the waves, so it chooses to make the waves uninhabitable. It is a strategy of negation, using the physics of chaos to cancel out the physics of order. American doctrine relies on control, precision, and predictability. Iranian doctrine relies on entropy, volume, and uncertainty. When these two philosophies collide in the narrow waters of the Gulf, the result is a chaotic environment where high-tech systems often fail. The complex sensors of an F-35 are less relevant when the runway it needs to land on is covered in craters and unexploded ordnance. The billion-dollar radar of a destroyer is useless if the ship is effectively mission-killed by a $10,000 sea mine. We must stop analyzing this conflict through the lens of Top Gun and start analyzing it through the lens of industrial attrition. The question is not who has the better fighter jet. The question is whose supply chain breaks first. This is the brutal arithmetic of modern peer conflict, stripped of nationalistic rhetoric and reduced to variables of mass and time. Iran has spent 40 years preparing for this specific exam, optimizing every weapon system for this specific geography. They have dug deep into the mountains, dispersed their command centers, and decentralized their control structures to survive the initial American onslaught. They are prepared to absorb punishment in order to deliver the one thing the U.S. cannot tolerate: a war without a clear exit. So as we look at the carrier strike group sitting just outside the Gulf, we have to recognize that the traditional rules of engagement no longer apply. The United States Navy is not facing a military defeat in the traditional sense. It is facing a geometric deadlock where every move incurs a prohibitive cost. When you step back and look at the entire theater, you realize that the ultimate target of these 6 tactics is not the hull of a ship. The real target is the political will of the adversary and the stability of the global energy market. Iran does not need to sink the USS Abraham Lincoln to achieve its strategic objectives. It only needs to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed for 90 days. If the flow of oil stops, the tactical victory of shooting down a few drones becomes irrelevant in the face of the strategic defeat of a global recession. This shifts the definition of the battlefield from the physical waters of the Gulf to the digital ledger books of the global economy. Modern war is not about who is the bigger stick. It is about who can endure the bleeding longer. The swarm attacks, the minefields, and the coastal missiles are designed to create a friction that grinds the American war machine to a halt. It is the weaponization of delay, using chaos to buy time and time to inflict economic pain. We are witnessing the evolution of warfare from a contest of strength to a contest of systems logic. The American system relies on efficiency, speed, and high-tech integration, which makes it brittle when faced with low-tech, high-volume redundancy. You cannot jam a mine that uses a pressure plate, and you cannot cyber-attack a diesel submarine that is running on batteries with its radio off. These analog threats act as a counterweight to the digital dominance of the US military, leveling the playing field through sheer simplicity. The Pentagon knows this, which is why the calculation for entering the Gulf has changed from when to if. To enter the bathtub is to accept a level of risk that has not been seen since the naval battles of World War II. It requires a willingness to lose ships, to lose aircraft, and to lose personnel in numbers that the modern public is not conditioned to accept. The aircraft carrier, once the symbol of untouchable American power, becomes a liability in this specific geometric context. It forces the commanders to keep their most powerful assets hundreds of miles away, effectively removing them from the fight they were built to win. This is the ultimate paradox of the modern age. The most expensive military in history can be checked by the strategic application of cheap, disposable violence. Iran's goal is not conquest, it is disruption, and in a deeply interconnected world, disruption is a form of power. By holding the choke point hostage, they hold the world economy hostage, creating leverage that far exceeds their conventional military strength. So, we return to the fundamental reality of the Persian Gulf. It is a trap designed by geography and perfected by engineering. The fast boats provide the distraction, the mines provide the denial, and the missiles provide the punishment. The submarines provide the fear, the drones provide the attrition, and the ballistic strikes provide the paralysis. Together, they form a cohesive kill chain that transforms the water into a no-go zone for any force that values its own survival. The question is no longer about firepower. We have plenty of that. The question is about the physics of volume and the economics of exchange. Can you shoot down 1,000 drones? Maybe. Can you sweep 10,000 mines while under fire? Unlikely. Can you protect a fleet in a bathtub against a coastline that is essentially one giant, fortified missile silo? Impossible. This is the cold, hard logic of anti-access area denial. It is not flashy, it is not heroic, and it does not make for good movie scripts. But it is effective, it is deadly, and it is the reality facing the US Navy in 2026. The era of uncontested American naval dominance in the littorals is over, replaced by a deadly game of cat and mouse where the mouse is armed with teeth. We must accept that in this specific domain, the defense has the advantage over the offense. The shield has become more expensive than the sword, and the geometry of the battlefield favors the one who waits. Iran doesn't have to win the war to defeat the invasion. They just have to make the invasion too expensive to sustain. So the real question is not whether the United States Navy can break into the Persian Gulf. The real question is whether the prize inside is worth the price of admission. Because once you cross the Strait of Hormuz, the only way out is through the fire. This is the difference between tactical capability and strategic wisdom. One asks, can we do it? The other asks, should we do it? In the unforgiving math of the Persian Gulf, the answer might be the one thing the military refuses to admit. Sometimes, the only winning move is not to play the game on the enemy's terms. We analyze the physics, we calculate the logistics, and we decode the reality of the kill chain. War is not a ritual. It is an engineering problem with lethal consequences for failure. Understanding the enemy's design is the first step in dismantling it. If you want to understand how the world actually works, look past the headlines and look at the map. Hit subscribe if you prefer hard physics over soft politics. This is Navy Decoded.